Welcome, friends. I'm so glad that you are here with us tonight. My name is Jeanelle Austin. I am the Executive Director of the George Floyd Global Memorial, and I just realized I'm still wearing my purse, so I'm going to take this off. How are you guys feeling tonight? Wonderful. I actually love that you just said good instead of like screaming, because that always bothers me in places. Like, give me your words. So I am excited to host and moderate this panel tonight. We have a great group of people here to engage in conversation about this trauma, this particular type of trauma that exists within our country, and the pain that we have from lynchings, frankly, lynchings in our country still, even now in 2022 with the recent loss of Amir Locke. So thank you for coming to the space. And so I'm going to invite our panel up and introduce them. It's a great group of people. So I will begin with Joel Thompson, who is the composer of 7 Last Words of the Unarmed. And a wonderful human being. And then we have Miss Angela Harrelson, who is George Floyd's aunt. Yes, Miss Angela, come on up. And then we have Dr. Scottie Carter, thank you, who I just met, so forgive me for messing up your name. And he is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion? Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the United Way. And so we're excited. Did I say United Way wrong? Oh. Okay. Y'all gotta understand, I've been under a rock for the event next week for Rise and Remember, trying to get that all done for the anniversary of George Floyd. So I'm coming up for air and I'm spending it with you. So thank you for being here today, and let's begin with a wonderful conversation this is gonna be tonight. So the format we're gonna do is I'm gonna begin by asking some questions to the panelists, and if we have time, we will take questions from the audience because I actually enjoy hearing from an audience such as yourselves. So we're gonna have a good time tonight, enjoy each other's presence, ask good questions, engage in thoughtful conversation. And so the first question I'm going to ask of Joel, which I think that a lot of people may be wondering, like, how does a piece like this, 7 Last Words of the Unarmed, even come into existence? Like, how does someone compose a piece like this? What for you was behind creating such what I would call is an important piece of this time?
Thank you for asking that question. The emotional impetus for the piece was really the decision by a grand jury in New York to not indict the officer who murdered Eric Garner in 2014. When I heard their decision, I immediately... Oh, sorry.
Should we take our masks off? Does that help? Okay.
Okay.
We're trying to stay healthy, y'all.
Okay. Well, yeah, so the emotional impetus was really the grand jury choosing not to indict the officer that killed Eric Garner. When I saw that decision, I felt a feeling of worthlessness because I immediately assumed that if I were in the same position as Eric Garner, that my loved ones, my family and friends should not expect justice. There would be no accountability if I were to be killed. And so, dealing with my own worthlessness, I devised this way of focusing on the humanity of these men and by proxy my own. The piece was really just born as a way of me journaling my feelings and trying to work myself out of a depression. It was not written for anyone to hear it. It was really just written for me to get in touch with my own worth.
Thank you. Thank you for setting that framing. And I think out of that, I actually want to bring the next question to Miss Angela, because the world watched while your nephew Perry, we know him as George Floyd, his life was taken from him for the perceived value of a counterfeit $20 bill. And so when you talk about worth, and then when we see the life of George Floyd taken over money, Ms. Angela, how do you, as an impacted family member, how do you navigate the way in which a life has been stolen from your family in a way that it was tied to value, the value of a Black life?
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay. You know, it was tough because there was nothing normal about any of this. Even when I heard about it when after he was killed through a news reporter, that when I first got the information, they called me. So everything was just out of the norm. And when it happened that this is real, this is true, it just hit me out of nowhere. And I had to learn how to navigate, or not just how to grieve as a normal family would, but with the world. But here's the thing, is that when the world was grieving in solidarity with me, it made me feel not alone. And that was very powerful, because even though I have family, you know, you hear about the white supremacists and all these people against you. You know, you still got to go to work. You still got to have your normal life. But when you see people from all different races willing to walk beside you, willing to hold your hand, willing to hug you, it really helps that process go a little bit easier. But there were rough blocks. And so, you know, there's no perfect solution how to navigate it. We as families that's been through this have to navigate ourselves through the process. And we learn. And we learn as we go. Sometimes I have good days. I have bad days, like the song says. But you know, when I get a lot of love from people around the world, and I always say this, the love feeds is the nutrition that feeds my strength to keep going. And that's what I do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I forgot to also introduce Ms. Angela, though, as the co-chair of the board of directors for the George Floyd Global Memorial. So she's technically my boss. But she's awesome. Like, I lucked out to have such an amazing human being who walks with me and governs me in the work that I do and that we serve together for the community. Dr. Scottie, can I call you that?
You can call me Scottie.
Just call you Scottie. Your work is deeply involved in community. It is deeply involved in making people's lives better, making families' lives better, making neighborhoods' lives better. When we engage these uprisings that happen after the death of a Black man or a Black woman or any person that's a stolen life from police violence, and we see these images of cities burning or communities being destroyed. And it's not just recently from Minneapolis. We can go as far back as the Watts riots, right? Or in the 90s with the LA uprising, Ferguson, and that Baltimore. There's so many cities where we see when folks have had enough. how do you, or maybe even your organization, look at that and say, and begin to make a plan with people for rebuilding? Like what, or do you, especially even as a Black man, just say, you know what, this needs to be what it is right now? Like how do you navigate that tension from being in an organization that is, it's tasked to build up communities, and then you're watching communities go through this particular kind of grief that is integrated with destruction?
It's a great question, because I think what, unfortunately, George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd being proliferated the way it was, it brought a spotlight, a huge, huge spotlight to community, whether you look at it in terms of where you live or in terms of where you work. We got to see how connected we were to trauma, unfortunately. And at Greater Twin Cities United Way, it was a space that rocked just like any other place. I have been a part of Greater Twin Cities United Way for about 8 months. But the great part about me joining 8 months ago is that they were planning for me way before then, because they saw the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion to be ingrained in the work, all that we do. So being part of the community, though, the United Way really tries to branch out and be connected. And unfortunately, what we saw was we're not as connected as we thought. We can do more. We can be more part of the community. And what I challenge everyone in the room is, how connected are you to the community that you say you're a part of, right? Because we see that, there's so many things that are divisive in what is out here. So there is often beauty in tragedy, and grateful for us to be able to see the beauty throughout the tragedy and how we can connect. And so we try to focus on that. I try to lead us in our work in terms of making sure that we're connected. One of my favorite mantras is to say is, nothing grows without the ground being disturbed. And I would make the assumption that we all were disturbed watching that 8-minute and 46-second video. And now, 2 years later, I'm still disturbed, if not more disturbed, that even happened here. Because when my family moved here, we were told that this is a progressive city. We were told that, you're going to be okay, a Black family moving here. So as a Black man, that's the second part you brought up, is like, how do I reconcile this as a Black man knowing that could have been me? And 2 years later, how are we showing up so that there's some level of peace that I can walk with? And I mean, we're not there yet. That's the truth. We're not there yet. And so how do we at Greater Twin Cities United Way help push us further along? How do we challenge our communities to get there? Because we can get there. It's just that, what are we willing to do to get there? Is it important enough?
This next question I'm going to ask, and it's for all of you to answer from your point of view. So with the 7 last words of the Unarmed being played here at the Minnesota Orchestra, and for all that it brings in terms of centering impacted families, centering the Black community, centering a Black experience, that has been part of our reality. What does it mean to you to have this piece being brought into a space that is predominantly white, historically white? What does that mean to you from your perspective as a composer, from your perspective as an impacted family member, and from your perspective as someone who is working in communities that are very diverse?
Well, for me, it's long overdue. It shouldn't be the first time you have a Black president. It shouldn't be the first time you have a black school teacher. You know, it sounds good and we're all excited, but it shouldn't be something for the first time. It's just way overdue. And we got to get to that point where we can embrace each other. We all are human beings. We all bleed the same. And I don't know who wrote the book that equality is an option. It's not an option. It's a birthright. You know, it's a birthright. And so, you know, when you think about brown and black people been negotiating equality for 400 years, because that's what we've been doing, is negotiating equality. To ride the bus, to go to school, to vote. That's something that we should not be doing in the 21st century. And so the fact that they're doing this piece that you did, and the fact that you're bringing it to the table to a predominantly white setting, that's a beautiful thing. It's overdue, but you, brother, you stepped up. He stepped up.
Amen.
And I'm proud of you. They're proud of you. And, you know, you're making it happening. And now since the door is open, because you have done that, then other will follow. Other will follow. Thank you.
I have to echo that. I think it's great. And I had the wonderful opportunity to watch the piece yesterday. Was moved, touched. It's for all those who are going to see it in a few, it's really an experience. What I will tell you, Dylan, and I shared this with some of our staff, was watching the piece, I was surprised to see how engaged the audience was. I mean, you could hear a pin drop. And it signified to me that there's hope for us as a community, because we're still open to these experiences, right? It is long overdue. Joel, your piece is magnificent, bro. Like, it is magnificent.
Wow.
Saying it's overdue is good, but like, it's true. But when I think about it, it's like, wow, like, this is 2 years after George Floyd. And we can come here and still have people vastly interested who don't look like me and you, right? And there's a space for hope here. There's a space for action here. And so by being part of this room, by being part of this space, it's like, okay, now you're going to be inspired to go and do more because there is more to be done. And I don't want to spoil it for you all. But the last thing I'll say about it being for a predominantly white audience is that it connects us to our humanity.
Yes, it does.
And that's what's important. It's our humanity, the dignity that we all share and reside. And if you can't see the dignity of these gentlemen in this piece, I implore you to check yourself.
Uh-oh.
Because that's how powerful your piece is, sir.
Thank you. This is so humbling to hear your reactions to the work. I'm just very grateful that the piece exists, that the Minnesota Orchestra has decided to program it, and that there has been conversation from the very beginning. We met months ago and having conversation about what's the best way to present this work, given the very fraught times, especially here in this particular community, especially given what happened across the street. And 2 years ago, how can we best use the transformative power of music to facilitate dialogue and community and connection and growth towards healing, in tandem with the work that you're doing with the George Floyd Global Memorial. And I'm just glad to be a part of it. I think you asked a very heavy question for me, though.
I did.
Because as a black person in classical music, I don't need to say anymore.
That was intentional on my part. You know that.
I am, like many of the composers that I've studied in my education, I'm literally just doing the same thing, which is writing about what I care about. And I know the power of music to facilitate that connection with my own humanity, which was the emotional impetus for the entire piece. And now to see that the piece is being presented in such a way that it functions as an invitation to empathy, as an invitation for you to walk into this space and feel my grief and my pain and my anger after all of these tragedies. I'm just grateful, that I'm thankful for music, I'm thankful for community, I'm thankful that we can facilitate dialogue towards healing. It is very hard to listen to, but I'm glad that your responses proved to me that there is some catharsis in recognizing that emotion, that you're not alone in feeling that grief and pain. And for others of us, it might function as an education into our grief and pain and anger. And so what I really like about what you said, Scottie, is this move towards action. I really hope that the piece can serve as a sort of impulse for all who listen to move towards action. Everyone has their own sphere of influence that they can use the power that they have to move towards equity, to move towards change, to move towards equality. And I hope that the piece does just that. But yeah, thank you for asking that question.
Thank you. So we have a little bit of time left. And I do want to open up to audience questions as well. I can keep going if you want me to. I was raised in the Black church and then trained as a preacher, so I can go.
Give us a testimony, shall we?
Right.
May the church say amen.
Right. This is what I'm going to do, because at George Floyd Square, we say, listen to Black people, especially Black women and Indigenous people. And then also one of the things that's special about the uprising, it really was a moment where we saw our youth leading. So I invite questions from the entire audience, but we are going to center and prioritize the questions that are coming from the Black community that's present in this room. And we are going to center and prioritize the questions that are coming from our youth. So 25 and younger, you can self-identify. I will look at you sideways if you self-identify and I have a question about that identification.
Don't be ageist now.
I won't say anything. I will just give a look. And then you can decide for yourself if you feel that look or not. But if you have a question, just please raise your hand. Again, we will prioritize our youth, and we'll prioritize, Mr. Vince, we'll prioritize our Black community members in this space.
Thank you. A question I have is for the composer here. I understand you wrote this piece back in 2014, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so then you fast forward from the advent of that creation and the responses and the reactions to that piece then. I understand it was received, but you also had some resistance to that. But then you fast forward from that moment where you presented initially to 6 years in 2020 when you have this incident where George Perry Floyd was killed. And you almost see that, how can I say it? I'm just wondering if this is like prophecy for you, or not even so much prophecy, it's just basically just saying that this exists for a reason, because this is still perpetuating, this is still happening. Even 2 years after George was killed, we still have this resistance to basically just acknowledging one another as brothers and sisters. I mean, whether we know it or not, we're all family, but it's just, I just want to get your thoughts on it.
I hear what you're saying. I've talked to Jeanelle about this. prior to our conversation in March, I had always said that this piece is the only piece that I've written, and it is my opus one. It's the first thing that I've let out into the world, and I've written quite a bit since then. But that first piece, Seven Last Words of the Unarmed, I had said prior to our conversation that I thought of it as the piece that I most wanted to be irrelevant. You know, I want this piece to just be a relic of a past decade eventually, you know. And Jeanelle challenged me on that and said that holding these men in memory can save lives, that it can do the work that we want it to do. And hearing the opinions of everyone here and seeing the reaction that it had yesterday, I'm even more convinced of that truth. I have been asked many times by well-intentioned people whether I want to expand the work and add more last words to the work. And my response has always been, I would rather people stop killing black people. And the sad fact is, like you said, is that I could write the piece, 20 times over since I, premiered the work in 2015. And I've written pieces in response to Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, sending Langston Hughes poetry. I've responded to the death of Ahmaud Arbery using James Baldwin's texts. I've turned to music time and time again to deal with the grief, the same very familiar grief that I feel in the wake of these tragedies, always trying to figure out a different angle to provide myself some solace. I would like to write about sunshine and butterflies. I would like to write about boats pulling into harbor. But I will continue to write about the things that matter to me, the things that keep me up at night, the things that plague my daydreams and my nightmares. Because I'm a composer, that's what I'm going to do. But I also want to facilitate more moments like this. And I think that music is a wonderful lubricant for moments like this where we can actually see each other. It holds a mirror up to me and I look at myself and then I say, Jeanelle, I want to look in this mirror with me. And you see me and I see you more clearly. And I think music can do that. And so I don't like to think of it as a prophecy, as you said. I more think of it as it's a part of my own internal meditative practice, and it leads to these moments like this where I'm just so grateful and humbled for the existence of music and the existence of community and what we can do in the space that it creates.
Could we, even if it's not a prophecy, can we consider it prophetic?
Sure, like the words of James Baldwin. I read the words that he wrote in like 1960-something, and I'm like, yeah, that's 2022 for sure. So, I mean, art can do that. Art can look forward and be very honest about our present while informed by the past, so.
Wonderful. I would also add in the truth that it holds, though, in speaking to people, that element of the prophetic, of some would define the prophetic being speaking truth to power. And so being able to have this piece that is constantly speaking the truth of the memory and holding the memory of these lives, it holds us in that tension of, like, what are we going to do about it?
Once again, you edify me. Thank you.
All right, we have another question.
This isn't a question for any one of you specifically, but how do you think future generations can build and learn from what we are experiencing today?
I'll take a stab at it. It's very hard because I look at this as a relay race, and every generation runs their part, and they hopefully exchange the baton to the next generation, and hopefully we move the marker that way. Particularly, I would look at the next generation and say, like, you can do this. Like, this can become a relic. There's a crack in the systemic racism that we're looking at. Because we're in the room. You're here now with us. This conversation doesn't happen 10 years ago. Like, look at the audience. Look who we are together. This doesn't happen 10 years ago. There's a crack. There's a space. And we push through it. We can really make a difference. But that's a generational thing. I talk about often with, when I'm in different settings, say, like, Rome wasn't built in a day. It wasn't destroyed in a day. But we can do this. So learn, watch, observe, see what works for our generation, see what didn't. So that you have some perspective for when you in the seat and standing and talking and speaking. You're like, okay, what worked? What resonated? Because I want to live to see the day that I don't walk in the room fearful for my life. I want that for you. Right? And so we fight because there is an expectation that we're going to overcome this. And that's why the piece is so powerful, because it illuminates an opportunity for us to connect as humans. And if we get back to that, we can overcome these systems that, horrible men put in position centuries ago. So that would be my, information.
I want to say the younger generation, you guys are fierce. I mean, when I grew up, we just stood on the sideline a little bit. But that's what I like about this generation, is how fierce you are. And you really don't truly know what you have. The technology, the social media, even though it's difficult, and I know they're under a lot of stress, this generation, to do things and the pressure, the peer pressure, there's a lot of opportunities out for you guys to take this movement to another level. And you guys can do it by watching and learning and making it better. Because we need to get to a place in life, in the future, when we all are past and gone, is that I don't want to be holding a sign that says Black Lives Matter. We need to get to a place where we don't have to hold a sign that says Black Lives Matter. And that's where your generation comes in.
I second everything, or third everything that has been said. There is a sort of, we can sort of fall into a sense of complacency, I think, where we can say, oh, the younger generation is more progressive than us, and they have all of the tools at their disposal to effect change. But someone who murdered a bunch of people in a supermarket in Buffalo is 18.
Right.
And so the same power and will to effect change can be utilized for evil. And I guess what I would caution that generation to do is just, I think there are, what Scottie said and what you both said, to look back at previous generations and see the work that has been done and continue to build on that. But do everything you can to build community. I mentioned earlier that everyone has their sphere of influence. I happen to do classical music. Whatever you happen to do, use that to build community. And allow the people next to you to see you. You don't have to take that burden upon yourself, but I think if you do have that extra energy of seeing yourself more clearly in the context of this society and allowing people to see themselves, that builds community as well. So I would say that.
Yes, we like to say, bring your gifts to the square, right, Ms. Laza? Bring your gifts to this movement, bring your gifts to this moment. Is there any, I think this would be a final question. Does anyone have a final question to take us home with tonight before we enter to experience? this wonderful piece as we heard through testimony. No final question? Y'all want me to ask the final question? Okay, I will do that. My final question is this. The stories, as are told through this piece, can surface an element of vulnerability. You wrote the piece. You experienced the tragedy as an impacted family. You live day to day working with people who are navigating this trauma. How do you go into that room and sit through this piece? How do you navigate that? What does that level of vulnerability mean for you? What does it do for you? Yeah.
For me, I don't think I've written a piece since this one where I've been as vulnerable. I'm now painfully aware of an audience anytime I write a piece of music. When I wrote this piece of music, I knew no one was going to listen to it. I was sure of it. And so it functioned as a diary entry. And even given its continued life since conception, it is still uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable for me to hear the work, even hear it rehearsed or performed, because it's akin to someone taking your journal entry that you've written 7 years ago, standing up on stage and reading, "Dear Diary." I've never been as raw or vulnerable, but what I have found and what the piece keeps teaching me is that level of vulnerability asks people to reciprocate. It asks other people to open their hearts just as I have in that piece. And all of a sudden, there's this energy in the room. And magic happens when that energy is there. And so even though it's going to be uncomfortable for me walking into that room, I'm looking forward to being able to be connected to everyone in that room through this energy. I'm looking forward to that.
Miss Angela?
I know that I'm going to be experiencing some discomfort, knowing what I have been through personally, watching my nephew pretty much preach his own funeral on that day. And it's probably going to re-trigger some things for me, but I know it's something I want to do, and I know it's something I have to do because I need to connect with other people that's going through that, and which I do, but hopefully, I can really, really connect in a different way that would work towards healing. It won't be easy to see the struggle. See, it's the struggle. It's the I can't breathe. It's the struggle of trying to hold on to life, to fight for life. But here's the thing I was trying to tell myself. Because for 9/29, when Perry was fighting and saying those words, it takes a lot of courage to say, I can't breathe. It takes a lot of courage to do that, because especially when you're in pain. And so this is what you're watching. So I always tell people, he was in a position where he's fighting for his life and it's fading away. And he was mustering those words with the strength that he had. So if he can do that in those conditions, then I can walk in there and see your movie.
Dr. Scottie?
I think I've actually gone in there and walked in and just was like, oh, we'll see what happens. What I would encourage you to do is to really go in and clear your mind, be present. So I use the phrase, nothing grows without the ground being disturbed. So think about your soil. Are you ready to receive the message that is in the piece? are you ready to be disturbed so then you can receive or be pulled to action? This is not, to me, this is not something you just go to just to say you've gone to it. This has to be far more intentional. So intentionally, since you are here, you are downtown, we're here, we're in the building, follow through. Follow through and be present. Don't be distracted. I did a thing I don't normally do, is I actually put my phone away and didn't pull it out. Like, I didn't answer an email, I didn't respond. I was present with the space. And so that's what I would encourage you to be.
On cue. Look, Jesus on the main line. Y'all better answer.
There you go. So, but no, that's the thing. It's on the main line. But it's to be present and to be intentional, because it is better for it. You're better for it. And look, disturbing is being disturbed is or being uncomfortable is not fun. But literally everything you do in life that has been a challenge to you and you've overcome it is far greater than somebody handed it to you, or you just got it right away. At least that's my experience. I don't want to speak for anybody else in the room. So, this is something that's going to be great. And also, once again, not to belabor the point, but it's done so elegantly. It's an elegant space. Like, you'll literally forget, like, wow, like, it is an experience to be a part of. And I've gone to concerts, I've gone to, my various spaces, but this was an experience.
So I'm about to send you all, and I'm going to send you with a blessing, because as you've heard, that this is a sacred piece, and this piece has made this space sacred. So as you go in peace. As you go in love. And as you go in justice. And in justice, not injustice. And all who have ears to hear, let them hear how justice is calling you to remember and to act. Please, go in peace.
Thank you.